Hi everyone, it's Chris and welcome back to another video. Thank you for joining me today. Now, a while ago, I did 3 different videos on 3 different record labels. That was Chiswick, Two Tone and Stiff Records. And so I thought I'd continue that theme today by focusing on another. And today's choice is Chrysalis Records, a British independent label founded in '68 by Chris Wright and Terry Ellis, hence the name Chrysalis. And it's got a decent roster. And so I thought I'd share with you some of my favourite 45, some album tracks, and some of my favourite albums as well. So let's start with 45. So 1979, Leighton Buzzards, I'm Hanging Around, backed with I Don't Want to Go to Art School and No Dry Ice or Flying Pigs. One of the few songs to mention, Russell Harty, I would imagine, but produced by Steve Lillywhite, who did so much production on bands like this around about that time. Next up is a band I don't know much about them, other than the fact I think they're a Welsh band. And this is the only song I know by them. And I remember hearing it on John Peel back in sort of '77 and thinking it was different to the rest of the stuff he played. It sort of stood out really. And it was Racing Cars and They Shoot Horses, Don't They? Which is the only song I know by that band. I occasionally see an album by them, but I have never seen anything else by them. Next up is a song that's often seen as one of the greatest cover versions of all time. And I wouldn't argue with that, actually. It's Nothing Compares to You by Sinead O'Connor. Irish artist who we sadly lost a couple of years ago, but a beautiful cover version of that song from 1990. This song reminds me of my last year at uni, and this is from '85. It's Paul Hardcastle and 19, the average age of the combat soldier in Vietnam, apparently. And that's from '85. Next up, I think, is this band's greatest song. It doesn't feature on their debut, which I think was strange, but I kind of understand why, because lots of bands didn't put singles on their albums, but it doesn't even feature on their greatest hits, which is really strange. But anyway, this is the best song, I think, anyway, by Generation X, Your Generation, featuring Tony James and Billy Idol, who went on to much bigger things. Both of those guys had been in a band called Chelsea, didn't get on with them, and created their own band in '77 or '76 sort of time, and that was Generation X. Your Generation. Next up is a synth pop classic. This I like a bit of synth pop, and I think this is an absolute classic of the genre, and it's Vienna by Ultravox. Great song. Next up is a guy who was in a band called Ace, who did that song How Long. I think he possibly is the singer on that song, possibly, and also featured on at least one album, possibly just one album, by Squeeze, and sung the song Tempted, which is a great song. But this is a solo single from Paul Carrack called Don't Shed a Tear from '87, very much of that time, and it's kind of like an AOR kind of rock song really, but I do really like it. So that's Paul Carrack, Don't Shed a Tear. Next up is a female artist who kind of made her way in the rock world, which was kind of unusual in many ways at that time. But anyway, it's Pat Benatar, and this is Promises in the Dark. She did a number of really good songs, had a great voice, Pat Benatar, and Promises in the Dark is one of my favourite songs by her. Next up is a song that's written by Terry Hall, the singer who we lost a couple of years ago from from the Specials. And it's co-written with Jane Wiedling, who plays guitar and does some vocals for the Go-Go's. And the Go-Go's did a version of this song, which is sung by Belinda Carlisle, which is, I think, a better version personally. But anyway, this is a good version. And it's Fun Boy 3 and Our Lips Are Sealed. Great song. From what, 82, 83? And the last choice is, I couldn't decide between these two songs, so I'm going to show both. This is a really underrated singer. He's got a wonderful voice. He's a Scottish singer. His name is Frankie Miller. And I remember first hearing the first one I'm going to show you in 1977 on the John Peel show, and he played it a lot. And it's from the album Full House, and it's called Be Good to Yourself. Wonderful singer, Frankie Miller, and that's a great song. And the other song I really like from him, which is from '79, is When I'm Away From You. Beautiful song, and really underrated vocalist. Okay, let's look at some album tracks. So people who watch this channel regularly will probably know I'm not much of a fan of this band. I think one of the greatest things they did actually was that. I think that's a great cover. This is, of course, Jethro Tull. This is their album Stand Up, which is kind of a neat little cover. But the opening song is called A New Day Yesterday, which is a good kind of bluesy song. The reason I struggle with Jethro Tull is I just don't like the flute thing. I can't cope with it. So, but A New Day Yesterday is a decent song, I think, anyway. Next up is a band that features Stevie Ray Vaughan's brother, Jimmy Vaughan, and it's the Fabulous Thunderbirds. And I think this is their debut album from 1979. And pretty much you could choose any song from the first side, I think, as a good example of what they do. Wait on Time, which is the opening song, is a good example of what this band were about. A bit of authentic rhythm and blues, bit of Texas blues. I do like that band. Next up is a guy who's often derided. He was very successful in the mid-80s, probably down to the fact that he did, where is it? There it is. This particular song, The Power of Love, the theme to Back to the Future. And of course, that's Huey Lewis and the News. And this is his second album from 1981, I think, or 80, on Chrysalis Records. This is Picture This. And there's two songs on here. I think it was a couple of songs I really like, more than a couple of songs. The opening song on side 2, Do You Believe in Love, is a good song. But the opening song, Change of Heart, is a really good AOR song. So that's Huey Lewis, Change of Heart from 81. Next up, going to a little bit of new romantic. So this is the debut album from Spandau Ballet. And this is called Journeys to Glory. And the opening song is a really good example of the new romantic era, I think, anyway. And it's To Cut a Long Story Short. So that's my next album track from Chrysalis. Next up is a guy who created his own band when he left UFO. This is German guitarist Michael Schenker. And I think Michael Schenker needs to be talked about in the same breath as some of the hugely influential guitarists at that time, like Eddie Van Halen and Randy Rhoads, because I think he's an incredible guitar player with a wonderful tone, and he looks the part as well. So Michael Schenker produced a number of albums. I don't know where this sits in his canon. I guess it's around about the fourth album he did, something like that. Anyway, this is Assault Attack, and it's the only album to feature Graham Bonnet, the guy who did one album, Down to Earth, with Rainbow. Great voice, Graham Bonnet. He didn't always look the part, but he certainly had a good voice. And there's a few songs on here which are really, really good. This is one of MSG's best albums, I think. But Desert Song is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So that's my next album track. Another artist who produced a lot of albums for Chrysalis was Robin Trower, guitarist who'd been with Procol Harum and then went solo. And this is one of the later albums. I think it was the last album to feature James Dewar, the bassist and the singer, who had a wonderful voice. Really defined the sound of Robin Trower, I think. And this is from '83. And this is Back It Up by Robin Trower, and the song I'm choosing from here is Benny Dancer. It's about 9.5 minutes with some just superlative guitar work on it, so wonderful stuff from Robin Trower. Next up is a band that's again often overlooked, British band who did, I think, over the years add a few American artists into their band, one of which was a guy called Jonathan Cain, who went on to much bigger things with Journey. He's the guy who wrote Don't Stop Believing, and he appears in the last two albums, and the band is called The Babies. The lead singer was a guy called John Waite, who went on to some solo success. He had a song called Missing You, didn't he? And they did 5 albums. This is just an anthology, the best of, and there's some really good kind of soft rock songs on here. And the song I'm going to choose off here is Every Time I Think of You, which is just a beautiful song. Absolutely fantastic stuff. Mentioned Jethro Tull earlier. Their guitarist Mick Abrahams, when he left the band, I don't know if he was kicked out or he didn't like the direction of the band. He went on to form a band called Bloodwind Pig, and this is, I think, their first album, second album, I can't remember. This is called Getting to This, and there's a song on here called See My Way, which is just a brilliant song with some great guitar work from Mick Abrahams. So that's my penultimate album track. And the last track I'm going to choose, the last album track, is not from the best album by this guy at all, but it's one of my favourite songs by him. Now, this is an Irish fella who I remember seeing live in about 1980. And I think if you have never seen him live, potentially you might not get him as much. This was a guy who was seen as one of the greatest guitarists ever. I think Jimi Hendrix actually said he was the greatest guitarist ever. Anyway, the guy's Rory Gallagher. And this is the album Against the Grain. As I said, not one of his best albums, although it's decent, but there's a song on here which I absolutely adore. It's called Souped Up Ford, which is really up-tempo rocker with some incredible slide guitar. He was a master of that, as he was the master of pretty much anything on the guitar. But yeah, brilliant song from Rory Gallagher, Souped Up Ford. Okay, let's look at some of my favourite Chrysalis albums. Now, in theory, I could show anything on two-tone because two-tone was part of Chrysalis. So this would be right up there with one of my favourite albums. But I've done a video on two-tone, so I'm not going to include two-tone records in it. But that would have been right up there. So let's look at some of the albums that appeared on Chrysalis Records. Now, earlier I mentioned Generation X and their song Your Generation, which I think is their best song. And as I said a moment ago, it doesn't even appear on their debut album, which I thought was really strange. It doesn't appear on their best of either, just get the glare off. But this is their debut album, and I think it should have been on there. There's a version of Your Generation, a demo version. I think they did a number of singles that they gave away at gigs or sold at gigs, and it's a demo version of Your Generation, and it's a really much better. It's a rawer version. But yeah, so there's my 10th favourite, if you like, album on Chrysalis. Next up is an album that reminds me of when I first started work in 1985. I remember buying it in 1985. And it's someone, again, we've mentioned already because he was in the band I've just shown. It's Billy Idol. And this is his kind of best of. He'd done about 3 albums prior to this point. And this is a compilation of some kind of mixes of some of his best songs. So the first side, for example, White Wedding, then Dancing with Myself, which Generation X had originally done, and it's called Gen X, I think, at the time. Flesh for Fantasy, Hot in the City's on here. There's some absolutely brilliant songs, and one of the stars of the show undoubtedly is this guy, Steve Stevens. Wow, what a guitarist he was. He did the theme to Top Gun. Although he didn't write it, he actually plays that. He's a fantastic guitar player, and I think that's a great album. Vital Idol by Billy Idol from '85. Next up is a South African guy, who ultimately played in the version of Yes that kind of regenerated them as a band. He played and wrote, I think, Owner of a Lonely Heart, and that's Trevor Rabin. So this is his second solo album from, 81, something like that, which was a big year for this kind of music, because this is like a really good AOR rock album. Open-ended, Heard You Cry Wolf, fantastic song. Do You Want Me, Lost in Love. This is a tremendous album. This guy was a seriously good player, and he's got some really good players on here. Mo Foster plays bass on here. Simon Phillips, brilliant drummer, is on here. Jack Bruce is on here. Manfred Mann is on here. But yeah, this is a great album. Wolf by Trevor Rabin from '81. Next up, I think, is the best solo album by this particular fella. I love his work with Mott the Hoople, and I do like his solo stuff as well. Ian Hunter, You're Never Alone with a Schizophrenic. What a brilliant album title. And there's some great songs on here. Just Another Night, Cleveland Rocks, which is an updated version of England Rocks. But Life After Death would be my pick from here. It's a wonderful album, and that's a great song. So that's Ian Hunter. Next up, a band who had been almost the stars of the show at Woodstock. They did a song called I'm Going Home, which is one of the highlights for me. They're originally on Dirham Records and then moved over to Chrysalis, and that's 10 years after. Alvin Lee's band, and this is a Space in Time, quadraphonic version of A Space in Time. And there's a couple of songs on here that I just think are absolutely fantastic. It's a great album, this. One of These Days is a really good song, but there's a track on here called I'd Love to Change the World, which is just brilliant. But that's a decent album by them. I might do a kind of a favourite 5 on 10 years after. I do like that band. Okay, earlier I showed Assault Attack by Michael Schenker Group, which I think is possibly one of their greatest albums, but I don't know if it's as good as their debut. This was the album that he produced just after he left UFO. This guy has got a wonderful tone. He can create brilliant riffs, incredibly melodic guitar solos, and there's some absolutely stellar hard rock songs in here. Armed and Ready, Cry for the Nations, Into the Arena, Lost Horizons. This is a great band, and that's a great album. Love it. Next up, we mentioned this guy already. I saw him live. I couldn't believe how good he was. He played the guitar like it was part of him. And of course, that's Rory Gallagher, Irish guitarist. influential guitarist. This guy could play it all. He was absolutely brilliant. There's a mix of kind of blues and rock and folky elements. There's some acoustic guitar. He even plays saxophone on here. And one of my favourite songs by Rory Gallagher is on here. It's called I Fall Apart, which is just beautiful. So that's the debut from Rory Gallagher, the guy who was in Taste prior to that album. If you like Rory Gallagher, or you like more rocky stuff, then possibly I would go to something like Top Priority as the first kind of taster maybe of a more rockier Rory Gallagher. Okay, next up, we're staying in Ireland, Northern Ireland band coming up. Their first album, which I think is better, well, I know it's better, that was on Rough Trade, but they moved over to Chrysalis and produced this album, which is, again, it's just brilliant. A band that are just great storytellers, a vocalist in a guy called Jake Burns, who just growls the vocals, just brilliant. That's, of course, Stiff Little Fingers. And this is Nobody's Heroes. We've Got to Get Away, At the Edge, just Tin Soldiers, some absolutely brilliant songs on this. I love this album. I prefer the first album, Inflammable Material, but I think this is a tremendous album. So that's Stiff Little Fingers. When's that? From 1980? Nobody's Heroes. Mentioned this guy already. This, for me, is his greatest album. I think it's his second album from, what, 74 or so? Robin Trow, Bridge of Sighs. I've mentioned this a few times. Day of the Eagle, Bridge of Sighs. In This Place, The Fall and Me, a little bit of Sympathy, and, of course, Two Rolling Stoned. This is his masterpiece. If you want to hear Robin Trout is best, this is the album to go to. Bridge of Sighs, fantastic. 2 albums left. These are 2 of my favourite albums, without a doubt, on this label. This particular artist produced a number of very, very good albums for this label, and this is an absolutely classic album, without a doubt. And of course, it's Parallel Lines by Blondie. I think this is her best album, or their best album. I mustn't say hers, because Blondie were a band rather than being Debbie Harry. Hanging on the Telephone, one of the best cover versions of all time. One Way or Another, Picture This, Pretty Baby, Sunday Girl, Heart of Glass. Oh, it's just chock full of absolutely fantastic kind of poppy, new wavy classic songs. It's absolutely brilliant. We all know and love that album. And my favourite album on Chrysalis is by a band who featured an artist I've mentioned a couple of times before, who featured Michael Schenker. That band are UFO. They did one of the greatest live albums of all time, Strangers in the Night, without a doubt. But my favourite album by them, and my favourite album on Chrysalis Records, is Obsession by UFO. There's Michael Schenker on the front. He left just after this album, which was a shame. This is, I think, the band at their absolute best. Only You Can Rock Me, Pack It Up and Go, which is one of my favourite UFO songs, if not my favourite one. Cherry, Hot and Ready, You Don't Fool Me. It's just a brilliant song. Brilliant album, great stuff, wonderful guitar tone. I don't know how he gets it, mixture of pedals and guitar and amps, I don't know. It's just a great rock album, great rock band. And that's my favourite album on Chrysalis. So there you go. Let me know what you think in the comments below. What have I missed that was on that label? And I'm sure someone will say Leo Sayer. But anyway, there you go. So I'm sure I'll be back sometime soon with another video. Cheers.